right, let's go ahead and start. Just got two announcements for you. My two announcements are that we have the sign-up sheet for those who want to help with meals with college ministry. We do expect this year to be more college students than we've had in the past. I mean, what is our college ministry? It's what, like 40, 50 people, maybe even more than that. Because they meet, if you don't know this, they meet on Sunday morning here for Sunday school. Then what they do is they go to Austin and Hadley's house Sunday nights this year. They usually go to Bobby and Laura's house. But this year they'll be at Hadley and Austin's house. So it's going to be it's going to be a lot. It's going to be a lot of things to handle, a lot of things to juggle. If we could get at least 2 people per month, that's the most important thing. And I know each month, some months have 5 weeks, some weeks have just 4.
I can tell you how to get from him.
How's that?
If you don't help, they come to your house.
They come, yeah, they can just bring them over to your house. That's exactly right. Another thing is that came up short is that we have, that came up so fast. It's like school coming back more faster and faster and faster is pushing things back. One thing we have is Glory Gang shoes. We have the shoes. They're actually sitting right outside here, all the refills of what we didn't use last year. So if you've never been a part of this, we will go and put shoes on kids' feet who need shoes, who want shoes. We'll give away these shoes. We will give them new socks. But before we do that, we actually wash their feet. So we will wash the feet of every kid that comes in there and gets shoes, and it's really cool. I think it's beautiful. I love to pray for dirty water. The dirtier the water, the better, because that means that kids' feet are really dirty, and we maybe can be able to love them, care for them. When you do this, if you want to sign up for this is what we ask you to do. For those who've ever done it, for you've never done it, ask someone about it who has done it, and they'll tell you what it's like. You go into a room, I will tell you what to do, Taylor will tell you what to do, that you sit down with a student, you sit down with a kid, and you basically ask them what's their name, what grade they're going into. If you don't want to be that guy, you can be a guy who's a runner who goes and gets the shoe size of whatever shoes they are. There'll be one side girl shoes, one guy boy shoes. You'll go over there and grab the shoes, you'll come back over here, you'll get a pair of socks, you'll sit down with the kid, and you'll put the shoes on, you'll wash their feet, put the shoes on, and it's a really cool thing. You get to talk to the kid. A lot of people they really enjoy being able to sit there and pray with kids, maybe for their school year, for their family. Some kids will open up more than others. Some kids won't say a word to you. Some kids will be really kind of rude. Who cares? You still are there to serve and love on them. And so it's really a beautiful thing. Yes, ma'am?
Will that happen here at the church?
No, it will not. It will happen at Glory Gang, at Icon Church. Behind it, there's a gym. And at the Icon Church behind it is a big gym. It might be air conditioned that year. It might not be. So it's year to year on that. But we'll do that, and we'll do those shoes. That is on August 2nd. August 2nd, Sunday, August 2nd. Okay, there's 3 time slots. The first time slot, I'm gone blank. First time slot is New Hope, the Church of New Hope. The New Hope Methodist Church that's out off 7 or 21, one of those, I can't remember which one. 21, and then the middle one is Grace Bible. I have them all set up to do it. If you can't come during our time slot, that is okay, because I will be there the entire time. I will give you a job to do. But our time slot for our church is 5:15 to 6, and our job is to clean up everything and making sure it's all done. We do the best job. We have the most volunteers, and so that's why I always sign us up for the hardest thing. Will we have kids come at that time? I hope so. But what will definitely happen is we will have a lot. So, when I say I hope so is because there's 3 time slots, and it's always one time slot that not enough people showed up to that time slot. We don't know which time slot it is until the day of. Why? Because we don't know what kids will get on the bus that day and come to Glory Gang that day. How hot it is today, how hot it is even today, I wouldn't go anywhere. And so especially getting onto a non-air-conditioned bus, I don't think I would get on that at all. But I got some of you who are signed up for it. Some of you love Glory Gang and being a part of this. If you've never done it, you should at least see it. It's a beautiful thing. We actually have the director of Samaritan's Feet, who's one of the Franklin Graham's ministry coordinators. They're actually going to come and watch us do this year because they want to use us as a model. And so it's pretty cool. Bobby, we've had that happen before. That was a gazillion years ago, wasn't it? Like when we had that guy, he was so kind too.
About 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, her name is April, and she's going to come. I think she's taking over his job. She's the one who we now call, and we get all the shoes from. She's super sweet and super good of those things. And so All right, so if you haven't been with us, what we are doing and what we've been doing, probably since May, we've done it for a very long time. We've explained how we've got Christianity from Christianity in, let's say, 30 AD, how we've gotten it all the way to East Texas, sitting here in these pews, in this Bible Belt, in East, like all of this world that we live in. Are almost to here. We're almost here. We're now at the American Revolution. I'll cover the least amount of time, and I'll be honest, I'm not going to talk about the American Revolution at all. I'm not talking about wars. I'm not talking about tea parties, really. I'm not talking about anything of the sort of that. So if you're asking and you're looking for that, but what I am talking about today is how Christian thoughts and Christian influenced not just the founding fathers, but influenced our Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights, the first 10 Bill of Rights. That's very important. And then it also talks about the Declaration of Independence, because it is different in the way we look at these things. So what I want you to see today is that I did my best to make this small. I actually researched a whole bunch of this. I had to get John Jackson, who teaches this every year, to kind of go over this with me to make sure I wasn't talking crazy talk. But it really turned out well. What I am considered that I do read a whole bunch of is I read about the Enlightenment. We'll talk about the Enlightenment in a minute. The Enlightenment will be very important that we understand, because that's what really has formed our brains even today in modern America, is how the Enlightenment has changed us. So if I was to ask you, how did people think? Now, and I want you to think, in the world that we live in today in America, we live with people who are so one side or this side, and it's like this side of the aisle or this side of the aisle. And in this time, there were parties. There were actually 3 to 4 parties. But what there really was is this unification of America. Like, I want you to think about it, the United States. And what the United States, like, think about what this is. This is English, and mostly English, people coming over to the new land. They then set up states, or they set up colonies. These colonies all have completely different purposes, and they're not united. They're not really caring for one or the other. Now, if you imagine, we can imagine this, if you think all the way up towards like New Hampshire, or even towards Vermont, or even towards Rhode Island and Massachusetts and all this stuff, and then you compare all the way down to Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and we know how these lands are. We know how these temperatures are. The biggest thing that united America is commerce. It's money. The problem is that that's not how they started. The way they started was they started off as individual colonies for all different reasons, why they came, why they were a part of this. And like I told you before, like Maryland was the only Catholic. All the rest of them were Protestant. The ones at the South didn't care as much as the ones up north about religious freedom. And again, this is very important that we understand. Religious freedom doesn't mean that you have the ability to be an atheist. It's that you have the ability to worship how you would want to worship God. An atheist would not be something that actually would be very common in this time. Now, John and I were talking about it when we were going through this, and he was saying how it actually is very true, especially when we look through history, that it's this 100-year, 3-generation gap. If you look at, and I'll say this, 100 years, 3 generations, and let's say this, the founding colonies came over. They were like what they wanted to do, why they came there. They were doing their best to like either be reformed in the way that they wanted religion reformed, or they wanted to be able to have commerce reformed, or maybe they just wanted a better life, or maybe they wanted land, because England's not that big of a country. So maybe we just wanted more of something. And they came here, and this is what we came here for, and they were just so concentrated on doing this, they weren't looking to try to unite the other colonies. They were just trying to have their own colony. And then another generation comes. And so let's imagine, if you have a generation, let's say the first generation is these devout Christians, what's the chances of the second generation being devout? It's about 50-50. Same thing for your kids and my kids. And so when it comes down to it, you just trust Jesus in a lot of these things. Okay, so just understand that. So you have a generation that's devout, loves the Lord. The second generation, and again, I believe this is where God really steps in, 50% of them would say would be for it, and the other ones wouldn't be. Then you usually have a third generation, and that generation usually is the generation that actually is more rebellious. We call them hippies when we think about, the 60s. But that would be that kind of, and it kind of gives me a good illustration of what I can show you. It's this generation where it's very rebellious. Then what happens is you start to have this pendulum that swings but kind of the other way. And then you have people who are maybe a little bit too self-righteous. So if we think about prohibition, when they illegaled all alcohol, that's that prohibition swing. And then you have the other swing. Now we're going to go all the way to the other side, and now we're going to be raging hippies and these things right here. And then we'll have this middle time, and then there'll be another swing. And so John was saying, I agree. That we're in another swing. It's either that we're in this swing where it's this crazy idea that we're this trans culture, and pray that we come back to the other side of that. And I think with the revival that kind of is taking place, it's not just the revival of morality or even Christian values, of just common sense. And we kind of are really striving for the idea of, if we keep going down crazy drain, where does that end? And so, and again, I'm not really political, but what I love, and I hope what you hear from me, is I love the philosophy. That's why I love atheists. I love atheists because of one thing. I want to know how you think. I want to know how do you see the world? So we see it through a biblical worldview, and hopefully how we see it is through the Bible lens that we actually should be building ourselves every day. But the way we look at other people's lenses and how they view different situations, like same-sex marriages, or even sex before marriage. Because what's funny about that is that if I go to a Christian and I say, what's worse, same-sex marriage or sex before marriage, they would say, oh, well, same-sex marriage is a horrific thing. Well, I'm going, well, what if they just basically just sleep around anywhere they want? They have this open relationship and they can do whatever they want. And they're going, well, that's obviously bad. Because what we have become is this: if they're not like me, and this is the problem with our self-righteousness in our generation, if they're not like me, they're wrong. If they're not just like me, just like my dad, just the way I grew up, if we do anything different than the way things go, and what I'm trying to say is there has to be a standard, and it can't be just because that's how you were raised. And we live that all the time. We live in this generation where it's like, well, that's not how I did it when I was this way. Well, that's why the Bible is the standard. That's why that has to be what we live our lives by, not by my daddy taught me, or my mommy taught me, or my grandpa. The Bible says these things. So I say all that to say, all of this, what we're showing here, is actually going to bring all of it into our room right here in Holly Springs. So that's what's kind of cool. First thing, colonial life and the Great Awakening. Last week we talked about the Great Awakening. We talked about these men, Jonathan Edwards, talked about George Whitefield, we talked about Jonathan Wesley. We talked about how Methodism was created. If you remember me telling you about Methodism, Methodism is basically a method of Christian thought. That is the first Great Awakening. Now, in the second Great Awakening, I had someone actually ask me at lunch today, they said, so tell me about when Church of Christ came. They were literally someone who walked up to my table and said, Pastor, I got a question for you. Tell me about the history of Church of Christ. And I said, well, it's an 1800 division. It's an 1800 denomination that was created. And they're going, well, I have my family who basically put so much stress on this, and this. The reason why all of this is what happens, but what's going to happen is what we're going to get into is this thing of a revivalism. And that's the last thing we will talk about tonight, but that's what next week is really all about. So please come for next week. I'll show you a lot of that. Look at there, first one. Colonial life is hard and local, centered around families, church, farming, and survival, and most people lived far from strong central government. Again, they started off in their own little colonies. The First Great Awakening changed the religion in the colonies by stressing personal conversion, new birth, and a direct relationship with God instead of routine of church membership. Now remember, what kind of church did they come from? They came from the English church, where it's tradition, where if you miss church, you're in trouble. You could even get taxed more. There was all these things. They come from this church revolution that's happening over in England during their Civil War, which we talked about, like 3 weeks ago. And they came here and they had something called the freedom of conscience. Okay? Freedom of conscience is very important. The freedom of conscience is that you have the ability to skip church and no one gets mad at you and the government has no say in if you do, if you don't. That's a very important thing, because should they have a say? Can the government have a say on if you go to church or not? Here's why that's crazy. when we were in Hungary, they have a state-ran church. And they would give you taxes when you go to church. They'll give you tax breaks when you go to church. They'll give you tax breaks when you give to the church. So there are nations that have control over the church, and they use it to their advantage. They use it to what they want to do. So understand this, that's not something that's an extinct idea. It's still around today. It's still a very real thing today. Third thing, the revival, this is the Great Awakening, challenge the authority, encourage liberty, because people who question the church leaders were also more willing to question political leaders later. So what happened is that these revivals gave people a relationship with God that made them have freedom, that made them feel like they had liberty, that they have a reason and a cause to live for. So the Great Awakening, which happened to the whole 100 years before, basically, that this is something that is absolutely is happening right before we have the American Revolution. Now, we talked about this last time. The colonies became more united through the awakening since traveling preachers, pamphlets, and shared religious experience connected different colonies and helped prepare Americans for common action. Now, here's why this did. The religious ideas that were up north, again, we said up north, there were more serious religious groups. They came down south, and that's where they spread the gospel. It's coming down. The middle was kind of like in the middle of it. They were kind of commerce-y and kind of not. I have a map that's amazing that we showed last time that kind of explains this. But that was really was built in this. This is George Whitefield, if we remember. This is the kind of times that we're talking about, and it's going to change. Now, what will change, and this is what's important to me, especially, I've told you that what I love about going to cities is I love to go to see their art museums. Now, what's important about art museums, and I hate this because they always have one section which is about clothing. And I won't lie, I hate going to the clothing sections. But I can't tell you how important the clothing sections are when you look at them in a picture. Now, this is colonial times. This is going to be 16 to 1700s. I can look at it just by the way they're wearing their caps. Most of the time, it's their hats that are able to identify this. But think about it. Does this look like Abraham? Does this look like, not Abraham Lincoln. Does this look like George Washington's group? No. No, it's going to change. Where are the fake wigs? Right? Think about the fake wigs. Think about, what else are we talking about? Think about the American Revolution caps. You know how they're like little, they look like army caps and all this? Those are going to change. Again, these are like Puritan caps, and you'll see things that are definitely different. See, now we have totally different garb, totally different ideas. This is them Tea Party as they go in this. This is going to be the famous painting over with George Washington that's in New York City that you can be able to go see. If you've not gone to New York City and you can go to New York City's art museum, this is what you would want to go see. You would want to go see just this picture. I promise you. And you're going, oh, I don't want to deal with New York. You'll be all right. It's a lot of this. This is all about the idea of taxation without representation. Look at the second point. The taxation, the main unifying issue with many colonies was taxation without representation. The colonists did not only object to the amount of tax, they objected to the fact that Parliament could tax them without their consent and would not give them representation in England. So they were being taxed from such far away, and yet all they were doing was providing goods for them. They were giving them the goods that they were producing at a low cost, and yet they were not doing this. So they started taxing everything. The Stamp Act, you probably have heard of, the Tea Act, I'm missing one. Sugar Act. They basically would tax anything they possibly could. You see right there, the second one. Trade laws and taxes were like with the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townsend Act, the Tea Act, made every colonist believe Britain was using taxes and trade to dominate them. The policies affected everyday business, shipping, printing, and commerce, so it touched many colonies at once and helped create a shared cause. The colonists believed a free people should be taxed only by their representatives, so that taxation became a major reason that they moved towards independence. So what's going on is that they're being taxed over these ideas. Now, if we think about this, there's this combating thing here. If I could get a whole big crowd in here, and think about it, where would they gather? How did they already know how to gather? They gathered because they did it in the Great Awakening. So guess what? They found these men who were, and again, they didn't have speaker systems like you're hearing me now. They had these great orators who could speak and be able to give these amazing demonstrations or protests. And so what they were able to do is they were able to gather in rooms like this, or they gather outside in assemblies, especially where if they built them, where they would create like an echo, kind of like they have an echo in this room. And we were able to do this. They would rile them up. How would they do it? They would rile them up over taxes, but they would do it through a religious way. Now, I'm not saying it was wrong, but there's always a mixture between religious actions and a little bit of secular, or even just the idea of, hey, let's think about this. This is really affecting our money. It's always going to be a kind of a mixture between the two. And you're going to hear me say, for anyone to say that everything about our government when it started was Christian, I think it's kind of foolish. But for it to say it wasn't at all is also kind of foolish. Because when you look at every one of these documents, you're going to start seeing traces of and hearing about men who had this. And we'll see these men in just a minute. We'll start with George Washington. These men had a devotion either for God, to God. Some of them had an education. Some of them didn't. Their educations didn't come from the Oxford and Cambridge like we've been talking about for the last, I can't tell you how many weeks we've been talking about this. There will be a man who comes from Oxford in a minute. But most of these men came from Harvard and Yale and Mary and what's his name? William and Mary. And a lot of these guys come from these early colleges. Now, these colleges came with theology. It usually was theology, and I told y'all this week. It usually was theology, which is usually a big deal, and it was either like the social services, like the liberal arts, okay? Now, as we think about today's world, it's kind of the opposite. Again, sciences weren't really this big a deal. It was kind of, we're going to learn how to write and how to read different things and how to do this. And what happens in this time, especially during their enlightenment, is that their educations are kind of going to flip-flop. They're going to become more adverse with the world. Now, I will say, if we were to look at the educations of our founding fathers, they're more secular than they are theological. But they are still theological. Even with Sir Isaac Newton, who's going to come up in the Enlightenment, he had an entire section about his writings, which was nothing about was all about theology, about God. So the question is, was there atheists in this time? None of these men were. None of these men were. I don't think anyone could be able to survive in this public arena saying that there was no God. Everyone admitted that there was a God. Now, how devout they were to God, and I mean Ben Franklin and Thomas Paine. If probably there were two people who probably were more on a secular end of these things, I think the most secular of them all was Thomas Paine. Probably the least one who kind of just didn't care was going to be Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin probably was more or less in that realm, but he did go, I told you this last week, he used to go to those George Whitefield revivals just so that he could be able to hear the things of that Whitefield said. He was just a captivating speaker, a captivating man who you wanted to hear from. You wanted to hear the stories that Whitefield was going to say. That's how good of a speaker Whitefield was, that he could captivate minds that didn't even know Christ, didn't even know Jesus. And Franklin wrote that he loved to be able to hear these things. But what we have during this time is going to be things that change. And so before I even introduce these men, I want you to understand, some of these men said that they love God or know God or believe that there is a God, but they didn't believe in the Trinity, or they didn't believe in miracles, or they didn't believe in fill in the blank. Now, the problem is, as you have to ask yourself, is there certain things that are non-negotiables and things that are negotiables? Now, if you've been a part of these Wednesday nights for a long time, we've talked about this 1,000 times. There are these tier one, this is what makes a Christian. These are the things that make you a believer in Jesus, the biblical Jesus, not the Jesus that you make up. This is what makes you a believer. This is a tier one Christian. But there's still men who would take and didn't believe in Jesus, or maybe didn't believe in Jesus' miracles, or maybe didn't believe in Jesus as the Trinity, as the Godhead, but instead they would use the Bible or use it to be able to touch people's hearts, be able to draw people in. So understand this, that these men would say, some of them would say they're Christians, but not Bible-believing Christians in these ways. And so I want you to know this before I switch the screen. So let's look at this. This is verse 1. He's easy to talk about. He's George Washington. George Washington is the easiest guy to talk about. Why? He's the one that every one of us know. We were taught about him more than anything else. Was generally viewed as a deeply religious in practice with a strong respect of providence, morality, and religious role in civic life. He was a believer in God. He loved the Lord. He even spoke about it on multiples of his writings. We have so much of his writings. That's another thing, is we have a lot of his writings. Some of these men, we don't have some of their writings because they got burned when the White House got burned. And so some of that stuff actually got lost in that. But not there at Mount Vernon. We actually have a lot of that still today. What's funny about George Washington, and what's amazing about George Washington, John and I were talking about how so many times he should have died. So many times he should have been shot all throughout all his military things. And it was very much like folklore, as if God was always watching over this man, that he would not, he couldn't be killed, is even what they would say. Again, this man fought in the French and Indian War. He fought in the American Revolution, and it seemed like everything he did would just kind of work its way out. And so there are a lot of things that comes down to George Washington that I struggle with. Is it mythology, or is it actually a true thing? I'll be honest, I don't know. But I can tell you, he's a believer in Christ. He's a believer in God. Now let's imagine the American Revolution happens. He becomes the first president, and they offer him. They're like, "Hey, you need to be our leader." But they didn't want to say leader. They wanted to say king. So they wanted to give him the ability to be able to be king in our country, where our country would have a monarchy. Eric Metaxas actually writes an entire section of he has a whole book, or I don't know if it's a book. I know it's a big thing. I read the whole thing. It's just about George Washington. It's really fascinating. And he goes over and over and over how George Washington was given the reins, given complete power. He could have just took the power of all of America. And he just said no. He actually tried to go back to Mount Vernon and just quit multiple times. They had to beg him basically to be the president, to be the leader. And they said you would have terms. And he did these things, and he had this. And I really want you to think about it. He had the ability to be king, and he said no. We talked about it the other day. Oliver Cromwell, who was there, who led the Civil War in England after they killed the king and they cut the king's throat, Charles I, and they offered him the same thing, and he said no. These were two men who actually were very devoted and loved the Lord. And I think when it comes down to it, what's beautiful about this is like they compare those types of acts towards the idea when Christ is king of our own life and our own world. And he took a cross for us for those things. And I really do find that. That's what Eric Metaxas wrote about. And I find it funny. So when I see George Washington, he's very endearing. Especially when I think about the idea that he was given complete control of our country and didn't take it, said no. And like I said, there's some of you in this room who know more stories, know more things about this American Revolution, especially about George Washington, than I do. But the next president was John Adams. John Adams called himself a Christian, but he did not accept the traditional doctrines like the Trinity. He was a Unitarian. John Quincy Adams was. John Quincy Adams. So this is John Adams. This is John Quincy Adams. Not as I don't really know if any of them are good looking. But yeah, they got a lot of fake wigs around here. You got some stuff going on. But we do have John Adams. John Quincy Adams was a devoted Christian who valued Bible reading, prayer, and the freedom of conscience. Again, freedom of conscience is the ability that you cannot go to church if you don't want to. Thomas Jefferson is the one I was speaking of earlier when I was saying how he taught. He believed in God and the moral teachings of Jesus, but rejected Orthodox Christianity and many supernatural doctrines. He was a deist. Thomas Jefferson wrote his own Bible. It's called the Jeffersonian Bible. I've actually seen a copy of it in the Bible Museum in Washington, D.C., and it basically takes out every supernatural thing that's in the Bible and takes it out. It's like the Bible's a good moral teacher. It's a good idea of how to guide your nation, but it's not really a way that we can believe in all that supernatural stuff. Now, that's what happens. Listen to me. That's the effect of the Enlightenment. These men being taught through the Enlightenment, they would say, if you can't prove it, there is no reason, the age of reason, if there's nothing that we can be able to prove, why would you ever believe this? And so that's what that would be. And that's how that would happen through there. Benjamin Franklin believed in God, prayer, and afterlife, but held unorthodox views that shaped reason and the Enlightenment. I got funny stories about Benjamin Franklin. I don't really have good stories about Benjamin Franklin. James Madison, he also, others tended to support religious liberty. He supported religious liberty and limited government over any other official national religion. And that's very important. He's the one who fought that we would have the freedom to worship how you wanted to worship, and not that the church or the state would have to tell you. So there wouldn't be one national church that would tell everybody what they were able to do. It's also very important that he also supported a non-national bank. And I hope you understand that that would be as absolute corrupt as there would be too. The best part about our country is that it is capitalist, even though people might hate it. Because if it's not, then it's socialist, and there's more corruption in that than there is anything else. And I'd love to go into that topic, but we're not going to. Samuel Adams, then we have John Jay. They were more openly Christian and often sounded closer to traditional faith. Alexander Hamilton, he had a more complicated path, but he later showed his strong Christian beliefs than many people realized. He, at the end, towards the end of his life, before he was shot, he had actually believed more in God. The last guy is Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine, who famously wrote, what is it, Common Sense? Common Sense, this is what the pamphlet that, and this is before the Revolution, I think is what it kind of energized everybody to do the Declaration of Independence. And this man is the man who basically was more openly hostile to anything Christianity. He did believe in the natural sciences, but I think it would be the idea that of nature being the one that's in there. I was reading through that today. He was there, the age of reason, attacking the Bible and organized Christianity. So if you look there at the very top of your page, the second page, and I hate having to give you all 2 pages, the founding fathers were not all the same religiously. Some were Orthodox Christians, and some were Unitarians, some were deists in outlook, and most believe in religions. Most of them were theists, which means they believed that there was a God. Now, I want you to think about it. If there is freedom of religion, when they wrote the freedom of religion, do you think they meant freedom to believe and not to believe in God? No. When all the documents that wrote, do you believe in God? I mean, every document that said what you had your freedoms in, they all said in God or through God or endowed by God. They had a God statement in it. But yet, the freedom of religion has kind of been twisted and has been used to be able to fight against the idea that you don't have to believe in God at all. And here's the deal, they don't. If they want to, they don't want to. That's fine. I think you do have that right to. But I don't think that's the way they intended it to be written, which they will say that it was intended to be written in that way. It was not. Because I believe, I think you either look at, and I think about it, I think the world still looks at the Bible and looks at Christianity this way. That it's built towards keeping, I mean, I've heard this 100 times, especially by Sigmund Freud, that religion is what we do when we can't understand the world and nature and everything bad happens. So we need to pray to something, we need to give thanks to something, we need to give offering to something so that whatever happens won't happen again. Now that's technically the bare bones of what religion is. What he would also say is that we don't really trust the government, and sometimes religion is meant to control people. But what's funny is that these religious people right now are the biggest threats to our society. It's that we have a standard, not man-made standard, but a God standard. And now we're the threat. That's why I don't think the world will get better. I think the world actually will get worse. And the reason why I think it's going to get worse is because that threat is always going to be a problem with someone with no standard. So they use the Bible for morality. A lot of these men would say, hey, I believe in the Bible, I believe in God, be good, act good, do good, especially golden rule kind of ideas. But if you really think about morality, is that really all, like, think about it. Is Christianity just morality? Is it just being good? Not getting out of line? Making your heavenly Father happy? Because that's the way they paint those pictures. If it's just morality, every one of you fail. And that's why grace is so important. Because the Bible shouldn't be a book about morality. Even though we are moral, it should be a book about that we need salvation. Not salvation by acting good. Because isn't that just works-based righteousness? Where we're just trying to earn our way to heaven? And I think that's a lot of how these men treated the Bible at the time. The Declaration of Independence is the next one. Declaration of Independence. You see, this is a famous drawing. This one's in Washington, D.C. We'll talk about that up there in just a second. Declaration of Independence. Declaration of Independence was written in 1776, announced that the American colonies were separating from Great Britain, for it was the people have natural rights. So this is what it says. It says that they have natural rights, the law of nature and of nature's God. And then it has a statement saying, endowed by their creator, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. FYI, one thing I don't like about the pursuit of happiness is that Aristotle is who coined that phrase. It argues that the government gets its power from consent of the governed, and it lists grievances against King George III to explain why the colonies were declaring independence. It is not a Christian document, but it does use Christian language and reflects belief in God and natural law. It just assumes it. It just assumes it. For us to say that there is not at least a theistic point of view in the foundation of America, it's absolutely silly. Absolutely silly. There is a theistic view. Now, can you say everyone believed it? Obviously not. Who could do that? How could you take a poll of every person and what they believed? And then would they tell the truth? Especially in that time period. Because in that time period, if you weren't a believer, you'd probably be blackballed, especially amongst your community, amongst your city. The next thing, one thing John was saying when he takes this every year, he talks about the Declaration of Independence, and it says that all men are created equal. This actually is the controversy. You think about it, women's rights, you think about it, slavery, all the things that come out of this document is going to be all men are created equal. What are we talking about? Define what it means by all men. Well, all white men, all no women, who is equal and who isn't equal. And so these are just things that are found that we see inside of these things. Now, are there going to be languages that are going to be found in here that are going to be used? Absolutely, there would be. And again, these men, I believe, that would be the ones who sat down together. There were two meetings of the Continental Congress and all that stuff when they met, and they really, I think the thing that really kind of drew them back together was religious talk. They said that it was a pastor who would actually keep these men captivated, that they would sit and not get mad at each other and storm out. And I found that very fun and very funny. My wife kind of, okay, I want you to kind of just, and this is kind of will help you in the age of enlightenment too. In this time period, there's no entertainment. Like, I want you to think about it. We can watch anything. We can play on our phone. We can see anything at any time. We see a picture of anything at any moment, right? Like, let's think about an orchestra. We could listen to any orchestra. We could listen to Beethoven right now. Me and you could. But you know why Beethoven was so Beethoven? Why he was so great? Because the people who heard him only heard him one time for their whole life, just for one time. Do you know how beautiful, you know what kind of emotions Beethoven would bring to your ears if you got to hear him one time for your life? Like, that would just be amazing. Like, that would change everything about everything. So when someone had the ability to be this charismatic speaker, charismatic person who could be able to present something, explain something, speak in a large group, that person kept people's attention. And I say this because when we get to the Civil War, pastors actually will take that strength and actually ruin it, because they're the ones that actually kept slavery circulating more than anything else. And the reason why they did was because they were basically like the town meeting every single week in those small towns. Town meeting was technically what happened on Sunday morning. They talked about what happened around town. They talked about the news that came in from the north. They talked about the news that came from the battlefront. And they taught people that slavery was okay. So what we will talk about probably next week is talk about how this idea of all men created equal, Christianity had a really big part of understanding how it made it better with William Wilberforce that happened in England. But on the other end, like, slavery is bad in the South because we picked on one group of people. Slavery has happened since the beginning of time. If it's right or if it's wrong, I'm not going to say back then at all. But the way we did it in America and how we picked on one group of people, I mean, it's never going to be right. But when Christianity is the one, or pastors, these leaders, are the ones that's employing this. And here's the thing, Southern Baptists, we have the dirtiest hands of them all. So if we're not real about who we are, I think it's silly. So the next thing, Bill of Rights. That sounds fun. Y'all sit there and go, wow, that's fun. I can't wait to talk about that week. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Now, again, the Bill of Rights are the first 10 Bill of Rights. You see them on the screen behind me. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights were mixed with Christian beliefs, Enlightenment ideas, and Europe's history of tyranny. So everything we talked about, how Europe went through all of its problems, the Reformation, when it went through all the problems with the Catholic Church and how it wanted to be able to, tell people, it could even have people killed. We saw it through the Reformation, how people started to push back against the kings and the queens and got out of line. And then you had the Pope who had too much power and he was doing all these different things. All of that kind of tyranny that we saw through Europe, and then how it got to England, and then how the English king, and then how it turned Protestant. We talked about that. We talked about Henry VIII. We talked about Elizabeth. We talked about this. And if you weren't here, go back and listen to those things. But then how we got here, that stuff shapes every bit of this. And we're still affected by the things that happened in 1500s. And the reason why is because we are trying to create a government. Again, there is no nations at this time. None. We are the first nation. We are the birth of nationalism. There is no, if there's an Olympics, it's like the kingdom sent the Olympics. The English is a monarchy, even though it has parliament. So it has this monarchy. We will start a country with nothing except for we are led by we the people, which is what this starts off with, we the people. The Constitution does not directly quote the Bible, but it reflects a culture shaped by Christian morality. And again, that's that using the Bible to make sure everybody stays in line somewhat. Religious liberty and the belief that power must be limited. Common biblical ideas are linked to the Constitution, which includes Isaiah 33:22 for the three branches of government, Jeremiah 17:9 for the need to limit power, Exodus 18:21-22 for shared leadership, and Deuteronomy 17-15 for choosing leaders from among the people. The Constitution includes a very few biblically shaped expressions and practices, like for the year of our Lord, and for the option for presidents to swear or affirm their oath. The Bill of Rights was influenced by John Locke. Now, John Locke is incredibly important for the foundation of our church, our foundation of our country. Our country really has nothing without John Locke and Hobbes. What's Hobbes' first name? Thomas Hobbes. John Locke, if you were to go into the big giant cafeteria room of, it's Hogwarts, but it's not Hogwarts. It's in Christ Church in Oxford. You will see a picture of John Locke. John Locke is a man who wrote a book called Two Treatises of Government. And he's the one who basically laid down the foundation of what he thought government should and shouldn't look like. A lot of his ideas come from the history of England, or from the history of Europe, came up with a lot of these Bill of Rights. John Locke and Thomas Hobbes are the ones who basically founded what these things. So it says there, the Enlightenment ideas were the natural rights and the consent to be governed. and the limited government. Both documents show the belief that government should protect human dignity, conscience, justice, and liberty rather than control people's lives. The founders also wanted to avoid the abuses they saw in Europe, such as religious persecution, kings having too much power, and limits on freedom. Together, these influences helped create a government that was secular in structure, but shaped by Christian and philosophical ideas about human nature and freedom. I don't know if you realize it's not, this American idea and this whole experiment that we've been doing for 250 years, it almost failed quite a few times. And the reason why it failed was we couldn't get out of our own way, and we kept resulting back to a monarchy. We either tried to give two people too much power, or we listened to them, or we didn't, and we didn't realize that it was for the people, and it was to be this equal. So that's why there is this 3 branches of government, and all of these things gets lined out. Now, what's beautiful about that is it kind of keeps you in these checks and balances, and I think that's the beautiful part of our country. And I will say, nobody thought this would work, especially the world. The world was probably cheering against America that anything like this Constitution would actually work. But what will happen from this, and we'll talk about it in just a minute, what will happen from this is there will be revolutions all over the world because of our revolution. But for us being able to be free, we will have the French Revolution that will happen right after this, and it's an absolute mess and crazy. It's so much fun to talk about. But I want you to understand, this is all, we hope this works. How do we keep everybody in checks and balances? How do we keep everybody not having too much power? I think the problem that we still have today is we still give the president too much, or maybe you think too little. You remember when you took all these history classes, you remember the biggest power struggle was, is it either the central government that has the power, or is it the state government that has the power? And it's even in these things where it talks about that power is not granted to the federal government, it belongs to the states and to the people. The problem is the federal government comes in and says something and changes completely that thing. And so they fight these things all the time. And so this idea of this new government is how we, the people, try to figure out how to do. And so I do find it fascinating. Probably the biggest influence that is in all of this that we can't see because we weren't taught this in school was probably about the Enlightenment. And so the next section is about the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is, to me, the most untaught thing in school. The Enlightenment is where we get everything from. It is the age of reason. It is the age to question everything. It's the age to where we get the philosophers that say that God is dead. It is the place where we say that we can basically figure out anything, and we come up with all these things. Like, you've been taught Age of Enlightenment ideas your whole life, the scientific method. I mean, just the idea that, you have a problem, then you have you have a hypothesis, then you have an experiment. Just, we reason our way through everything. What we have is, and I want you to hear me say this, we have these Christian humanists. And I've said this before with Erasmus. And I say that it probably starts around that time. And that's around Luther's time. But what you start having are these Christian humanists that what they want to do is they want to make people believe that they can make their own choice, do the right thing, act the right way. They can control their own fate. They can do it. All they got to do is just buckle down and just do it. They can fix their own eternity. They can handle their own life. They can be in control of everything. And it becomes people's obsession. But if you drop the Christian humanist and you drop the Christian and you're now just the humanist, that's what the world that we live in today. The world that we live in today basically says that all mankind will figure out whatever mankind will figure out, even space, even all the things that we do, we are in control of everything. That there is no God. Because this is where this is introduced, is that what kills God is that we then say that, hey, we can have this Christian humanist that we can figure it out. We can have an explanation. We can do these things. Then we kill the Christian idea of it all. We are in charge of everything, and now we're God. And that's the world, the atheistic world that we live in. We live in a post-Christian world. That's what we'll talk about a couple of weeks from now. but we live in a post-Christian world. And that post-Christian world is affected by these men. Now, like I said, during this time, we have Sir Isaac Newton. We have, coming out of this will be Charles Darwin. Coming out of this will be all the different ideas of planetary motion that we actually we'll go back and actually tell we'll say that Copernicus wasn't crazy, that the Earth is not the center of the solar system, that it's the sun, center of the solar system. And what it starts to do is, and then we have geology that then is started to be researched. And then we start to have chemistry that's not alchemy, where it's completely outlawed, but now it's completely understandable. So now we're starting to understand and do all these different things. And so all of these sciences start to grow and start to get smart and start to get better. And what we do is, as man, is we say, look how smart we are. Look how good we are. And that's the age of enlightenment. And this is what leads to, like I said, statements that says God is dead. It's because of this time period. The Enlightenment was a European movement from the 16 to 1700s that emphasized reason, science, evidence, and human progress. Now, I say this because most of your founding fathers were raised and taught schools that taught this. When the Enlightenment happened is when you start to see Harvard and Yale, which again started off as theological schools, but then slowly started to embrace the new changes, the new ideas, the new things. Enlightenment thinkers believe people should question tradition, test ideas, and use reason instead of simply accepting authority. You can see that. You can see that even through this last couple of weeks as we've been doing Genesis. Is that, do you really believe that Noah put all these animals on the ark? Do you really believe that people lived 900 years? And you start to, your age of reason brain is going, I just can't figure that out. I can't figure that out. And you really have to really start to ask yourself, do I have to have it figured out? Like, do I have to know that? Or can I trust the Bible? Can I trust the God? Can I trust Jesus? Jesus believed it. Shouldn't I believe it? And you're going, well, it just depends on how much your faith is in Jesus. And maybe. And you're going, well, I can't outdumb myself. I can't, that sounds, and so when you think about people who believe in Christianity now, you're considered uneducated. If people look at the people in the Southern Bible Belt, they would say how uneducated we are that we still believe in this whole fairy tale God in the sky. But you think about this. This is from this time period, how it's shaped and molded us and made us. For it has a major effect on the world by encouraging new ideas about rights, liberty, toleration, education, and I'm sorry, I lost my voice. Education and the government by consent. First guy is John Locke. John Locke's real pretty. He's a good-looking guy. I always tell y'all, none of these guys are good-looking. They're all messed up looking. Next guy I got is Voltaire. Voltaire is a good-looking guy. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And so Rousseau, I could go through each and every one of these things. The main thing, there's a book called by Carl Truman. I'm blank on the name right now. But he wrote a book, and it talks about how the sexual ideas have changed from these men all the way to the day that we are now. That we're even questioning our gender and having same-sex marriage and having all the problems that we have with like our sexual identity all come from their ideas. So these men are the reason why of how we've gotten these ideas into our brain and why they've. My favorite book by R.C. Sproul is a book called The Consequences of Ideas. He outlines every one of these philosophers and explains that how these philosophers and their ideas and the consequences of what their ideas have actually made. And so it's a beautiful book if you want to read it. Consequences of Ideas is a great book. If you like philosophy, you really would love that. Voltaire argued about freedom of speech and religious toleration. Jean-Jacques Rousseau focused on the social contract and the idea of government should rest on the will of the people. Here's why it's funny. Most of these guys are French. These guys are French. When they start, you can just see it's just bubbling over there in France. They're about to have some crazy stuff going on over in France, and they do, right? They kill basically everybody. They cut everybody's heads off. Remember the guillotine and all that fun stuff? They kill everybody. And what's the funniest part about them is they kill all their monarchy, and then you know what? You know what we need? We need a little bitty guy to be our emperor, and we're going to take over the whole world, which leads to Napoleon. if America did it right, France did it wrong. We were trying to not make a king. They did their best to make another king, and they made a tyrant of a king. And so it's a totally different world. Immanuel Kant's last page. Immanuel Kant said enlightenment meant people should think for themselves instead of depending on others for every belief. It also helped shape modern politics, science, and idea of governments should exist to protect people and not dominate them. And in America, Enlightenment ideas influenced the founders' beliefs in natural rights, limited government, and checks on power. Thinkers like John Locke especially shaped American political thought by teaching that government should protect life, liberty, and property. American leaders also combined the Enlightenment ideas with Christian beliefs about morality, human dignity, and the accountability before God. So again, always going to be that there is a God in the American point of view. It's only in the secular point of view that God dies. Last one, the American point of view, the Enlightenment helped shape the nation that valued freedom, self-government, and individual rights while still drawing on a moral foundation shaped on Christianity. And I know I'm a little bit over. Next week, we're going to talk about this. If I was to say what makes the nation that we know now, because think about it, after the American Revolution, this is where we are. And we all know where it's going. But if you think about what really makes it, the American Revolution, all this stuff, look at the last statement on the page. Christianity, we know in America, was later shaped by nationalism. Okay? Nationalism is, we're going to use the Bible when we need to on a political platform, when it helps us, but we'll drop it in a heartbeat if it doesn't help us. Because you think about our political parties that we have even today. One is probably a little Christian, and one is probably sometimes too much Christian. Because sometimes one side might sound like the government that wants to have a government-controlled, you better be at church every week kind of thing. And then sometimes you have some people over here that hate God, but they'll still call themselves Christians because they always have been. And we have people who are like that. So that's what that nationalism is. We also have manifest destiny. Manifest destiny is the idea that we are going to go from this coast to this coast, and we're going to do whatever it takes. And while we do this, we're going to start towns all the way through this. And how are we going to start towns? We're going to build a church. First Baptist Church. How do you think that's first? Because when you're running through the town, through revivalism, through a revival period, you have a revival, a tent revival. That tent revival, that pastor probably got paid, actually, by the way, but we'll get into that. That drives me crazy. And then what happens is that pastor leaves that place and goes and makes another revival, and then goes and makes another revival, and goes and makes another revival. As theology goes from East Coast to West Coast, theology is destroyed. That's why the West Coast is so liberal. It just is. The reason why the East Coast is as liberal as it is now is because most immigrants immigrated here and brought all their ideas from outside into our country. So that brings in some other things. Next thing, manifest destiny, revivalism. We talked about from going from East Coast to West Coast, stopping every little town. Like Garrison. I mean, Garrison's a great example of that. It's a town where they would have had a tent revival. Some people would have decided to stay. They have the revival. The pastor would have gone on to the next church and gone to the next place and gone to the next place. And it would just kept on growing that way. And the last thing is the Enlightenment ideas, which influences how Americans understood faith, identity, and the role of religion in public life. All of these things are what's going to get us to where we are right here. And why we believe what we believe, and why this is the Bible Belt. Have you ever wondered why it's called the Bible Belt? You ever wondered why there's not church? Like, we have not said a word about some denominations. They're not invented yet. They're only about a couple hundred years old. Not one person would ever say certain things. No one would be, like me in trouble. There's some things that are said, like in a Pentecostal church, a Church of Christ church, multiple places like this. If they said it back in Luther's day, they probably would have been burned at the stake. Only in America is where things like this can happen. And I'm telling you right now, only in America you can have Mormonism. only in America you could have Jehovah's Witnesses, where they just destroy everything you and I have believed in 2,000 years before us. Why? Because some dude took that bad theology that was taught on those revivals and spun it his way. And then he created some followers, and that's kind of how it worked. And so, I'm sure you got questions. If you got them, come ask me. But let me pray for you and let me let you go. I'm so sorry. I'm over time. Lord God, thank you for today. God, we thank you so much for just the grace and mercy you show us. God, we thank you for the story of how we believe, how we know, how we have Bibles, God, how we have all these things, Lord, that we don't take church for granted. That, God, this is not a church with just things that we do, but things that we are. That, God, we are believers. We don't just say that we're believers and then go live our lives however we want. That we are believers each and every day. That we're Christians each and every day. That we believe in an orthodox, a correct way of believing through you, not through a way of which someone took it maybe recently, but how the Bible's been taught for hundreds and hundreds of years. And God, I pray, Lord, that that's what we live on and we believe. In your name we pray, God. Amen. Thank you, guys.